Thank you so much for being here for the training on setting healthy boundaries with me, Angie Stevens. This training is brought to you by the Nebraska Department of Education. It's a grant funded by the Department of Health and Human Services and SAMHSA. So this is provided to you at no cost, which is wonderful, right? Because we all know the teacher salary nowadays, not much better. So setting healthy boundaries with me, Angie Stevens. So who am I? I am a licensed independent mental health practitioner and clinical social worker. I'm a mother of four, 2 girls ages 3 and 7, 2 boys ages 9 and 16. I am the guardian and conservator of my own mother, who is diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and bipolar. So she has schizoaffective disorder. I love karaoke. I love playing board games, though my husband's not a big fan. I have converted my children into being a big fan. And I've worked in several different capacities as a social worker. I've worked in children's shelter. I've worked in voluntary case management. I've worked at Project Harmony as a trainer, as a trauma therapist. I've worked at Children's Hospital as a medical social worker. And most recently, I worked at a behavioral school, a level 3 school, as a school social worker. So first, I want to kind of establish the importance of setting boundaries. Obviously, these are things that we all know, but it's good to discuss the reasons behind it because sometimes we forget. Boundaries are ways in which we define ourselves to others and inform the world of our own needs. So we naturally set these boundaries when kids are small, where, hold my hand when you cross the street, don't touch the hot stove, don't put things into the light socket. The physical boundaries are a lot easier for us to set because they seem to be this universal understood rule. Same with, eat your vegetables, right? It's a doctor that has said, this is really healthy. So those boundaries are much easier because either the stakes are higher, right? I don't want my toddler to stick a fork in the light socket because I don't want something to happen to her. But it's also because sometimes the person setting the boundary is outside of myself. So I could, the doctors say this, it's not me. Boundaries, ultimately, they define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins, leading me to a sense of ownership. Knowing what I am to own and take responsibility for gives me freedom. This is one of the unspoken gifts of boundaries that often we dismiss or miss altogether because there is a level of discomfort that falls within that. If I say I end here and you want to end here, there's got to be this give and take where somebody starts to move in a direction that makes them feel a little bit uncomfortable, right? But that's the gift of relationships because boundaries are highly personal. Setting healthy boundaries allows for healthy navigation of relationships. It teaches accountability for one's actions, encourages respect of self and others, fosters self-care and self-love, promotes a sense of agency and independence, and increases trust and safety. I mean, these are things that we know from the research that setting healthy boundaries does. Yet we still struggle with it for ourselves personally and as serving professionals, whether you're a school counselor, a school teacher, a school social worker, a school administrator, or just anyone working with people. It is difficult to set those boundaries because we do what we do because we care about people. I want to talk about the language of boundaries because, again, there is this universal agreed upon boundaries like I had talked about earlier. But like I also mentioned, boundaries are highly individual. So everybody speaks their own language. There's also within this the language that you learned growing up, right or wrong, right? Because if you grew up in a traumatic household, you might have learned boundaries of I don't talk to adults. I don't ask for what I need. I mean, think about the kids in Romania that grew up in the orphanages. What did they learn? The boundaries they learned was you don't cry, you don't make a sound, because it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to come to your aid. So whether that is a healthy boundary or not, that's the language that they learned early on.
Parenting is a language. What do I mean by that? I will explain.
Okay, this just goes right in. I'm sorry. I love this video because it's talking about parenting specifically, but I think it applies to all things, especially boundaries, because boundaries are a language in and of themselves. So I want you to hear Dr. Becky Kennedy's explanation, because it is the best explanation of parenting and boundary setting I have ever heard. And she didn't even know she was talking about boundaries.
Parenting is a language. What do I mean by that? I will explain, and I promise this metaphor is going to connect so many dots in your brain. Think about the way you were parented. That was the language you learned. Did it involve talking about feelings? Did it involve repair? Did it involve seeing the good kid under the bad behavior? Now think about the language of parenting you want to give your kids. For most of us, we would say it's a different language. Now this helps so much, because if you were always spoken to in English and you wanted to teach your kids Mandarin, I think you'd say to yourself, okay, I can do that. Yes, it's hard. And of course, I don't just naturally have Mandarin skills within me to teach my kids Mandarin. I can go find those skills. I can go invest in the right resources so I can learn what I need to learn, so I can teach what I want to teach. But that is not some natural thing that happens. The other thing you would know is in high stress moments, of course, you would revert to English, right? You'd be really stressed. You couldn't access the Mandarin. You'd speak English. And then after, I don't think you'd say, oh, I'm the worst parent ever. I'm doing my old thing. I think you'd say, okay, that makes sense. Let me take a deep breath. I can go back to Mandarin right now. This is what it means to be a cycle-breaking parent. This is what you're doing. You are both learning a new language and teaching that new language to your kid at the same time. And you know what that means? You are amazing and you're doing a great job.
One of the things I love the most about this is, as teachers, it's even more difficult because you're trying to teach Mandarin to your students because that's important, or that's what the research says is best, right? But then all of your students also speak their own language. So they come in speaking Japanese, speaking English, speaking Spanish, speaking sign language, whatever it is, they all have their own individual languages as well. And so not only do you have to, recognize what you're wanting to teach and give yourself grace for going back to the English in Dr. Becky's example, but you also have to recognize when these students are trying to learn Mandarin, but in high stress moments might go back to their language, and you have to understand their language as well. So it's really, it's one of the most difficult jobs being a teacher that I don't think people truly understand and appreciate as much as they should. There are several different types of boundaries, and for the sake of this, I have included personal boundaries, professional boundaries, and emotional boundaries. I'm not going to talk a ton about the personal boundaries, mostly professional and emotional boundaries, because I find in my experience with working with teachers, being friends with several teachers, it's the professional and emotional boundaries that seem to be the most difficult for them to navigate. Their personal boundaries, yeah, I mean, those can be tough too, but they don't impact them as negatively as the other two. And I am going to go through the professional boundaries with children, even though a lot of these are already fully understood by many. I think it's good to just kind of go through them. So I'll go through them kind of quick because I really want to spend more time on the back end with the emotional boundary setting. Consistency, establishing consistent rules and expectations. I mean, this is an age-old rule, right? We know that You have to, create your expectations and be consistent. It's that chaos and inconsistency that is the most difficult for kids to thrive within. Being firm but fair, setting firm boundaries, but ensuring that they're fair and reasonable for children's age and their development level. Positive reinforcement. Oh my God. I mean, again, this is something that is just a no-brainer for so many teachers, but always a good reminder, at least for me as a parent, because sometimes I notice I am overwhelmed and stressed, and I do focus too much on the no, stop, and when I find myself constantly making those sounds, I realize I'm not focusing enough on that positive reinforcement, because in those moments I'm exhausted, right? So it's like, oh, thank God that you're finally doing that good thing, but I don't say it. And so just remembering how important it is to praise that, because kids want to please you. They want that praise. They want that attention. If they don't get that positive attention, they try to get it in a negative way, which is truly the language that a lot of us in those professional roles are combating, right? They're trying to get that attention, and they've learned in certain households, if they're one of 10 kids, or if they are, growing up in a traumatic household, or their caregiver has to work 7 jobs because they can't, make ends meet otherwise, oftentimes they do seek that negative reinforcement because that's the only attention that they've gotten. Model healthy boundaries. Kids watch more than they listen. They pay attention more than they pay attention, right? They do as I do, not as I say, right? Or do as I say, not as I do. Is that what it is? Yes. No, they're going to do as you do. That's just it. Clear communication. I can't tell you how often I have interacted with teachers, either through my work or through my personal life, where it's like, well, the kids should just know why this is important. Well, that's not fair, right? I like to go into those certain circumstances with the assumption that they don't know. Any circumstance, if you go into it with the assumption they don't speak Mandarin, they don't understand that language, they don't know why it's even important for them to learn it. Explain to them. It doesn't take that much longer for you to do. Just explain the rules and regulations. At the behavioral school I worked at, kids couldn't wear hoodies. And at the beginning, kids would be like, oh, stupid rule. I don't understand it. Why can't I wear a hoodie? And I'm like, I honestly don't know. I had to go ask. Come to find out, because of the nature of the students that we worked with, we were all trained in providing physical restraint or doing physical restraints, because we got the really assaultive kids. And if you are doing a physical restraint on a kid, that is a choking hazard. So I had to understand the reason that boundary was put into place in order to explain that boundary. But I had to take that extra step. So then when a student would be like, oh, stupid rule. Yeah, you know what? I also think it's a silly rule. I wish you could wear hoodies. Unfortunately, because of the choices that you have made, that has resulted in you being placed at a behavioral school. And we have to be able to physically restrain you should you become violent or aggressive in any way. Therefore, that is a choking hazard that we're not willing to, put your life at risk for. Simple. Respecting their privacy. This is a tough one as a parent, especially. In a school setting, I think for me, the way this would play out more looks like not sharing a student's business if you don't have to. Granted, if it is something that a student is sharing with you that, my rules and when kids would come to my office would always be, if somebody's hurting you, if you're threatening to hurt someone else, if you give me permission to tell, or if you are expressing suicidal ideations, then that's automatic permission for me to tell. And I would let kids know that ahead of time. But otherwise, if they wanted to come and complain about their teacher or come and complain about their parent, it's not my story to tell. Therefore, I respected their privacy. And what you find with that is kids then open up to you a lot more often about those concerns, which is great. That's what we want, because these kids really need someone to talk to. They need an adult, a safe adult, to truly understand what it is that they are expressing. If they don't have that, then what do? They talk to their peers. And Lord knows you don't want to talk to your peers about, what is sex when you're like in third grade, because they're not going to give you any sort of knowledgeable information. Redirect and address. This is, I guess, an area that is really comfortable for some teachers and really uncomfortable for others. The hardest part within it is we don't want to make people uncomfortable, especially kids, right? However, it's so important that we do address a boundary crossing promptly and calmly, and addressing those conflicts with guidance and support. I had, again, behavioral school, keep this in mind, but I had one student who, would put his hands in his pants often in the classroom, and it would make other students uncomfortable, make the teacher uncomfortable. And so that was a very uncomfortable conversation for myself. And I pulled in another male colleague because I did not want to have that conversation alone with this male student. But it was a necessary conversation to have, because that was a boundary that was crossed that is not okay. This happened to be a foster kid who had bounced around from home to home to home to home. So I had to assume that this kid had never been told, this isn't appropriate. Touching yourself, that can be fine in private. Doing it in front of people, not okay. So again, redirecting that behavior and addressing it, it also helped in the future, because then if that line was crossed, we could then address it much faster and be like, nope, inappropriate now, because now he understands the rules of the game. Some helpful tips. Peer-to-peer learning was huge at my school. My students crossed boundaries all the time. They didn't care. So noticing when those boundaries would be crossed between peer and peer relationships, and I could often have a conversation with one student, find out their side, another student, find out their side, and then I could facilitate that conversation between the two of them, which the learning that they would gain from one another was huge as far as boundaries. Because it's one thing to hear an adult say, you crossed that line. It's another to hear a student say, you crossed that line, and I'm uncomfortable with that. I didn't like it when you called my mom out of her name. I don't like that at all. And being able to express that in, loving and respectful ways is amazing. Stage boundary situations. If you know a kid, continues to cross somebody's boundary, set up an opportunity for them to learn from your life examples, whether it's true or not, right? So I'll give you an example. One student always interrupted whenever somebody was talking, always, and it drove the teacher nuts. It drove the other students nuts. So I set up an example in my office where I interrupted him several times when he was telling a story. And then I could apologize. I'm so sorry, I interrupted you as you were speaking. I know I don't like it when others do that to me. And so I'm just really sorry. Sometimes my ADHD gets the best of me, and I really have to be aware of that. Does that happen to you? Because then it isn't me targeting him. It isn't me saying he did something wrong. It's me admitting something that I did wrong, but it's also something that I know he can identify with, right? So I know not to interrupt people. However, if I can stage that, I then can use that as a teaching moment. So getting creative with how you have those conversations is really important. Being authentic and warm, but holding your ground. Another boundary of mine is lying. My students knew, you don't lie to me. If you don't want me to know something, don't tell me, but you don't lie. So a lot of my students, especially those that were in foster care, they begged for me to advocate for them, this way or that way, with their caseworker, with their judge, with their probation officer, with their foster parent, whatever it was. And I would always be very clear. And I would say, as long as you are honest with me, I don't mind sticking my neck out for you. I don't mind at all. I don't mind putting my reputation on the line, but I need you to understand that this is a special privilege that is not to be taken for granted. So if I put my neck out there for you and I find out that you tricked me, you didn't tell me the whole truth, and I'm operating from this one mindset when in fact it's this other situation, then we're going to have an issue and I'm not going to do that again. So a lot of times they get that one morning, right? But afterwards, if they want me to say something, I would then be like, I'm sorry, I really want to trust you. I do. Unfortunately, you have lied to me several times. You've tricked me several times, and I just don't feel safe doing that. So I want you to get your information out there. How can I help you? Do you want me to facilitate a phone call with you and this person? Would you like me to help you write a letter? So it's not that I created the boundary and said, oh, tough shit, you're on your own. I created that boundary and let them know that they crossed that, but I also let them know I still care about you. I still want you to get this information out there. I'm just not willing to put myself on the line for that because you crossed this boundary. That was a choice you made. And again, lesson plans and role plays, huge, huge, huge. There are opportunities within so many stories, so many, math problems even, where you can take that as oh, how would you feel if so-and-so did this? I included this link on there. I don't know if you can click it or not. So if not, just go to teachhomealive.org. But there's so many really great role plays within there. I personally feel like there should be full lesson plans on this because this is a life skill that is really, really needed, not only to show respect for others, but also to show respect for ourselves. And I think that's something that societally we really, really struggle with. Holding that respect and that limit for ourselves is necessary, and kids aren't learning that often. Professional boundaries with parents, establishing communication channels. So, if you're wanting to have that open line of communication, I think having that conversation with parents and this is obviously to your comfort level, of how they best communicate. I would do an intake with a family and I would say to the parent, I can email you, I can text you, I can call you at your home or your work, I can leave a message. How do you best receive information? And then I would allow them to make that decision. Now, I know for a lot of teachers, a lot of individuals, texting is uncomfortable for them because they don't know how to draw that boundary. And I get that. There are Google numbers that you can access that are, so that they don't have your personal information. But that is a line that does need to be crossed. I can tell you as a parent, I prefer texting. That is the fastest way I can get information. I don't check my email all the time. I don't have an alert on my phone for email. And even if I did, I don't even respond to texts half the time because I have children constantly pulling me in 7 different directions. So, it's going to be different for everybody. But establishing what that looks like for you. If you're only going to do email, then let the parent know. I will be communicating with you via email every Monday. So check your email. Because if a teacher were to tell me that, then I know, oh, okay. If I want to know what's going on in that classroom, I check my emails on Monday. Set expectations. Communicate clear boundaries regarding the type and frequency of communication that is appropriate. The problem with this, sometimes we don't always know that a boundary has been crossed until it's been crossed, right? So you have that single dad or single mom who continues to, hey, kind of flirt with you. Okay, I don't like this, right? Or you have that mom who Facebook friends you on Facebook and you're like, I don't want to be Facebook friends with them. That is not something I'm comfortable with, but I didn't have that conversation. So, moving forward, once those lines have been crossed, sometimes you can set those ahead of time. Otherwise, it is tough. It is having that conversation after the fact and saying, you know what? I'm sorry. Hey, Mrs. Stevens, I noticed that you sent me a friendship request on Facebook. I want to let you know I'm not ignoring you. I have a firm rule that I am not Facebook friends with any of my parents while I am teaching their student. But you can feel free to join this Facebook group that I established for our classroom so that you can see what's going on. One of the bigger things, at least for me, that I noticed was a parent not respecting my time after hours, after school hours. I get it. Parents are also working. As a parent working, it was hard for me to have those conversations during the time I was working. So being able to be clear and consistent about that, I will try to schedule time. If there is a concern that you want to address with me and you cannot do it during school hours, I will work with you to schedule a time that we can discuss this. I will not be available at your leisure whenever you want to just call me and talk for an hour and a half, because I prioritize my family. Professionalism. I mean, it's a no-brainer, yet it is also really tough because we are human. And some circumstances with parents really, they really push us, and they push our buttons, or they trigger a trauma response that we weren't even prepared for. I had a parent attempt to berate me once because I had to call CPS. It wasn't even me. It was our med aide had to call CPS because of a medical issue. Now, I had been involved in this because she wanted guidance on how best to do this, but the parent just ripped into me. And I let her know, I'd be glad to have this conversation with you. I have no problem discussing this with you. However, I will not allow you to call me names, and I will not allow you to yell at me. So if you want to discuss this, if now is not the best time, if you're too upset, you can call me at another time. If you want to do it now, then I need you to move forward without that. Otherwise, I will have to take a step out, because I do not deserve to be treated like this. Clarifying your roles. My role as teacher, your role as parent. It seems like it's something that should go without saying, but it doesn't, because I think in a lot of ways lately, one of the patterns I have noticed is teachers are expected to be glorified parents, and parents forget the responsibility that they have to teach at home. It makes sense because a lot of the parents are exhausted. A lot of them are working 10, 12 jobs. Not really, but you know what I mean. And it's, or they don't even know how to teach it. So I think as that teacher, sometimes you're teaching the parents too, of saying, hey, I'm working with Timmy at school. I really could use your help in reinforcing X, Y, and Z at home. Would you like some tools or some tricks to do that? Do you feel comfortable with that? Do you have the time to do that? And it kind of invokes this conversation of, more insight into their household, more insight into what the parent truly knows and doesn't know, their abilities or inabilities. And it opens up that avenue just by clarifying that role. But it also takes some of that off of your plate, because then if the parent comes back and is like, well, you didn't blah, 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 or my kid, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, that isn't my role, right? So you can do that in loving, caring ways without it sounding rude, without it sounding dismissive. One of the things when I used to do family therapy, I would always say at the beginning, okay, while doing this, I will allow each of you to share your side. You are not to interrupt one another. You're not to, do this or say that or blah, blah, blah. You can speak to your feelings. By pre-teaching that, it made it so much easier to hold those boundaries moving forward, because I knew that the individuals, they were going to cross that boundary, because I do that, right? I interrupt my husband, even though I say, don't interrupt me. I interrupt him when I'm upset. And then he can be like, no, you said it was my turn. Ah, you're right. So by clarifying those roles, setting those boundaries ahead of time, it makes it a lot easier to continue forward. Being transparent, being authentic, don't sugarcoat things. Share what's actually going on in the classroom with a student, with the parents. I know it's hard. As a parent, obviously I don't want to hear the teacher say, hey, your kiddo's struggling to handle their emotions in the classroom, and they continue to, cross boundaries in this way. I don't want to hear that. But if all of a sudden this has been going on for 6 months and you're just now telling me, there's things I could have been doing at home, there's conversations I could have been having at home if you had let me know, despite it being a difficult conversation, right? So just being that as transparent as possible. Boundaries in meetings, sometimes you have to set those timelines, and sticking to the agenda. I mean, right or wrong, I used to use the trick with like parents that would talk my ear off for a really long time, or would, overstay their welcome in meetings. I would have to say that I had another meeting to get to, or I had another phone call to get to, because it's the only way I could find to get them off the phone. I don't like being dishonest. However, it was the only way I knew how to set that boundary without offending them in that moment. And a problem-solving approach, problem-solving mindset, aiming for a resolution for the child. And I think one of the biggest things with this is, whenever possible, release the blame from the parent for the child's behaviors. Unintentionally, often the way that, and this is found in a lot of serving professional conversations, from doctors to social workers to therapists to teachers, the intention behind a statement is not meant to sound harsh, yet as the receiver, it can. So for example, Billy seems to really be struggling in school lately with his emotions. Is there something going on at home that I should be aware of? Okay, so as the giver of that statement, I'm coming to you with concern for Billy. But depending on the receiver's traumatic experiences, depending on the receiver's emotional well-being, they can easily hear that in a defensive mode, in like, well, I'm obviously not doing something right. I've been working more lately and there's been more arguing at home, right? So I might, if I take that defensive stance, I'm no longer listening, we're no longer problem solving. So just kind of being mindful of that possible response and just reframing the way that you say it. I've noticed Billy seems to be struggling with his emotions at school lately. Are there any strategies or techniques that you found at home that really help him when he struggles to calm down? Because I'm struggling to find what works best. And I don't want to see Billy suffer. I'm hoping that you might be able to help me with that. So it's still the same question. So let's say that the parents are going through a divorce. It invokes a different response where the parent might say, oh, I've been noticing that too. His dad and we've been arguing a lot more lately, and we decided to get a divorce. And, so now I have a little bit more insight into what's going on. Parent isn't taking it defensively. Managing empathy and compassion. This is a big one, especially for serving professionals, safeguarding your own personal well-being. And it is essential. And I know teachers are so sick and tired of hearing self-care, 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 but it is necessary. So I'm going to kind of tweak it a little bit and give a few more ways to look at it, hopefully, that will make it not feel so like, ugh, self-care, right? Self-awareness, I start with self, right? But understanding your emotional limits and recognizing when you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed. This is necessary to help you manage your emotions. If I've been up all night with a screaming baby who is sick with an ear infection and I still have to get up and go to work, I have to recognize that my emotional capacity is not as high as it has been in the past. So let's say I have one particular parent who calls me daily and just complains about the same thing over and over and over. If I recognize my emotional wherewithal for that day, I'm not going to answer that phone because I simply don't have it. You can think of this in like personal regards too. You know, if you have that friend who just takes, if you don't have it to give, then set that boundary. Don't give it. Don't answer the phone. If you've noticed that they've texted, don't open the text. If you know that you're going to be baited into it. If you have a student who's needs 100% of your time all the time, letting them know ahead of time, hey, you know, Sally, I am just really tired today and I really want to be there for you and show up, but I'm just letting you know, like, I'm just really not 100%. You'd be surprised how much grace people offer if they know this. Failure to assign boundaries is often a direct result of trauma or other unmet needs within childhood that caused one to adopt a people-pleasing mentality. A lot of people who are within the serving profession, it's an altruistic job, right? We love to heal others because it makes us feel good, like we're doing good. And it's really healing our own unmet needs, our own trauma. Knowing this can help you be self-aware of even something with good intentions that is depleting you is not a healthy boundary. I'll give you an example with my children recently. I love bedtime. I used to love bedtime. I used to love the tickles and the singing, and it was just this beautiful connection that I had with my kids. 4 kids later, and an hour-long drug-out bedtime, it's just too much. It's too much. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't set the boundary, because that mom guilt would come in of, oh, well, your kids are only young once, and they're not going to ask you to sing to them and tickle their back forever. And don't be selfish. You know, you can take time afterwards. All of these things. It wasn't until a friend pointed out to me that it was because I had unmet needs from 0 to 5. I had inconsistent parenting at bedtime that I was then trying to overcompensate by not disappointing my children at bedtime. I felt guilty if I had to disappoint them, rather than recognizing it was a healthy boundary for me and for them on a day that I just simply didn't have it to give, or I had other responsibilities that I needed to give attention to, and releasing myself from that guilt, knowing that I was just trying to people please because of my own traumatic past. I hope that makes sense. Setting boundaries. We have to set those boundaries. We have to be clear with what those boundaries are. We have to define them for ourselves, and then we can explain them to others. How often, I mean, how many of you have sat down and just been like, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm just going to go through what my boundaries are. We don't do that. We don't think about it until somebody's crossed it or until somebody brings it to our attention. And the problem with that is then what often happens is that guilt comes in, or we don't address it, or it's more difficult. So when we can define those ahead of time and set those ahead of time, makes it much easier. And one of the best ways to define your boundaries is by defining your priorities. My priority is my family. Do I care about my students? Do I care about their well-being and their family's well-being? 100% I do. But I care about those during the time that I am supposed to care about those. Now, that being said, of course, I'm going to think about them and try to come up with ways after hours. But I use that as an example because I would let parents know in the evening and on the weekend, I will not respond to your messages. Feel free to text me if it's something you don't want me to forget, because Lord knows I have ADHD, so I will forget if I don't do it right away. That's fine. but I want you to understand, I will not respond. And it's not because I don't care. It's because I care enough about my family and my time with them that I need to give my children their time when I am with them. And so I never had an issue. Once I set that boundary, I didn't feel guilty for not responding. I didn't feel that I had to respond because, you know, the families couldn't handle it. And the parents never got angry with me and felt hurt because I didn't respond. I set that boundary ahead of time. Releasing that guilt. Some people think setting those boundaries is wrong, but it isn't. You know, they feel guilty because they're disappointing somebody, or they are making somebody feel uncomfortable, or they're afraid that this person isn't going to like them anymore, is going to reject them or not talk to them anymore, or whatever the reason is. Release that guilt. Again, boundaries are personal. Setting your boundaries gives someone else permission to set their own boundaries. Just like shining your light and talking about how wonderful you are, that gives someone else permission to talk about how wonderful they are, right? We model what we want others to do. And just because society, especially in that teacher role, has taught that you don't have boundaries, you're just at the whim of everyone, that doesn't make it okay. You have to start modeling that. You have to take that step to say, no, this is a boundary that I do not want crossed. I am uncomfortable with. Here's why, right? You don't have to be a jerk about it, but you also don't have to feel guilty about it. Practicing self-care. I mean, we all know this. You've been to all the trainings. Self-care. Take care of you. Do what you need to do for you. You do not have to deplete yourself for everybody. We live in this society where, you know, it's like the nobility of sacrifice. I'm not downplaying Jesus Christ or giving to others, right? Sacrificing your umbrella for another. Those are beautiful things. But there's something within our society that we put those up on a pedestal, like that's how you're supposed to be all the time. That's not realistic. Yes, if I am 100%, I can sacrifice something for you. I can give you my umbrella because I know how to be in the rain. And I wore a shirt that is capable of being in the rain. But if I wore an Angora sweater that cannot be in the rain or it will be ruined, do I still have to sacrifice that I love, that Angora sweater that I really like, for you? Or can I say, I'm sorry, right now, I can't, right? So yes, sacrifice is beautiful in moderation. It does not need to be the standard. Utilize your support systems. Talk to your colleagues, talk to your friends, get a mentor, find like-minded people who can understand what you're going through, but also find people who challenge you and push you and can say, no, you crossed that boundary. You should have been firm. You should have said blah, blah, blah. You know, the example of the bedtime for me, it was a friend that pointed that out to me, that she's like, do you think that it's the fact that you didn't have that? I had never even considered that. Now, I could get pissed off at her. No, but I have surrounded myself with people who see things differently and challenge me because that's what I want. I want to keep growing. Mindfulness and stress reduction. Recognizing when you are at your max, recognizing when you need a break, recognizing when you need to breathe through your feet. You know, breathing through your feet is imagining a line from the center of the earth through your body and back down. You pull from the center of the earth through your feet like straws, and then you release it back down. It is a simple technique you can do that will reduce any sort of like overwhelm feeling within your body if done right. It's very simple. And it's a good one to give to kids too. But also recognizing when, oh, I had this wonderful lesson planned for my students. We were going to do all these activities. And then my dog got really sick and I had to put my dog down, and I just don't have it to give today. I'm going to have to push that lesson plan off. That's okay. Recognizing that you are also only human. You know, I had days that were really, really overwhelming, and I would pull my students in because they really needed to talk to me. And I would just be honest with them. And I would say, hey, I just want to let you know, like, I'm not 100% today. I'm kind of struggling myself, but I care enough about you that I didn't want you to feel like I didn't care or that I wasn't showing up for you. But just to let you know, like, I'm not 100. Okay. That's all right. It gives them permission to do that too. It's all about that balancing act, right? You don't want to be too rigid. You don't want to be too open. You know, being too rigid causes problems and makes people feel judged. Being too open creates chaos and suffering. And it can be hard to separate those feelings of concern from wanting to save. Because we get in that mindset where we want to save everybody. We want to save all the ASPCA puppies in the arms of an angel. Sarah McLachlan, you know, you ruined us, right? You make us want to save all the kids and make the world a beautiful place. But the world also has to have some of that pain in order to recognize the beauty of joy. So there is this give and take. You're not failing if there is pain. You're failing if you don't meet that pain and say, I'm here with you, right? It's not to get rid of it. It's to see it for what it is and hold space for it. Limit emotional investment, hardest thing for social workers, therapists, teachers. We are empathic by nature. That is what makes us great at our job. But it is also what causes the most burnout and the most pain. So maintaining that professional empathy without taking on the emotional burdens, coming up with whatever that looks like for you. For me, I know that I'm planting seeds. I'm not always going to see the seed come to fruition, but I know I have planted enough seeds within this child. It is up to them and whomever else they interact with to flourish or to water those seeds, right? It's not my job to fix everything. I also am a firm believer, and this is something that helps me, I'm a firm believer that we have to go through difficult life experiences in order to grow. So I see challenge as a gift, as medicine. I don't see it as a failure or a punishment. And for me, that really helps with that emotional investment, because I'm not then taking on the pain and suffering of the student, of my colleague, of the parent. I am helping reframe that suffering for them so that they can hopefully see the gift and the medicine within it, so that they can continue to grow. So finding different things that help you limit your emotional investment so that you aren't depleted. Because this idea that we have to give a piece of ourself to fill the whole of another, it's inaccurate. I am spending time with you. Yes, I am gifting you knowledge, but I don't have to gift myself to you. And the problem that we run into with that mindset then is we don't know how to bring it back. We don't know how to fill that hole again. So then we gift and 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 we gift to where we have no more pieces left to give. And we are burnt out. But it's because we have this idea that I have to sacrifice who I am for you. I don't have to sacrifice myself for anybody. Do I want to show up and, spread love and joy and teach and guide? Yes, These are my passions, but that doesn't come at the sacrifice of my own well-being. Develop healthy coping mechanisms. Journaling, talking to a trusted person, engaging in activities that bring you joy and relaxation. Like I told you, I like karaoke and board games. Those are healthy. I also sometimes go to like, oh, I need a drink, right? I recognize that that is an unhealthy coping mechanism. So I have to be aware of that tendency of I'm so overwhelmed. I just want to separate my mind from the overwhelm. Recognizing what is healthy, what isn't healthy. Exercise, it can be healthy. It can also be unhealthy. If you exercise to, 5 hours a day, that's might be a little much unless you are an Olympian, right? Prioritize tasks. When you are feeling overwhelmed, a simple boundary to set, this is one that always helped me, was the boundary I would set for myself is, okay, I have 12 tasks that I need to get done. I don't have the ability today to do all 12 of these. So I will focus on the 4 tasks that impact somebody else's job or impact somebody else's ability to do their job. So I have to get this thing done for the principal in order for him to, or I have to write the newsletter for the principal so the principal can get the newsletter out. I have to do this billing so that we can get funding from Medicaid, right? So whatever things are like impact other people's jobs, that's how I prioritize. You can prioritize however you want, but setting that limit and that understanding within yourself of what is your priority, and then aligning your tasks like that, because somebody's always going to come to you and make their issue your priority, right? They're going to say, this is an immediate need. Is it? Is it? A family who's getting kicked out of their house and is going to be homeless? Yes, that is a priority. A family who is a week late on paying their OPPD bill? Not a priority, right? In that moment, a priority, yes, but not necessarily the highest priority in that moment. Reflect and evaluate. And we've already talked about that, but always reflect on your needs and where you're at. And then seek professional help if needed. There is no shame in talking to a therapist or a spiritual advisor, or going and getting a tarot reading, or listening to a psychic medium, or going to church and talking to your priest or your pastor. Whatever professional help you need to help you regain your balance and remember who you are and what you need in each moment is great. There's no shame in that. Okay. As a therapist, I talk to a therapist. Actually, most of my friends are therapists. I did this on purpose so that I don't have to pay for therapy. I just get it for free. So just make friends with therapists. See, there you go. A common misunderstanding about boundaries is that someone else is crossing them. One of the most important parts of boundary work is understanding that you are responsible for holding your boundaries with someone else. Your boundaries are yours to keep, communicate, and honor. This is important because when we feel overwhelmed, when we feel that we are being taken advantage of, when we feel that people aren't listening to me or they're not respecting me, it's because we are failing to set that boundary. We are failing to see something within ourselves that needs healing. We are failing to see the gift within this overwhelm, the medicine of, wow, this is an opportunity for me to figure out where I end and someone else begins, and use my voice, and not to feel guilty about it, because I am then giving someone else permission to use their voice. If somebody gets upset about it, that says more about them than it does me. It's not mine to hold. Same with a boundary, right? Recognizing what is yours to hold and what is someone else's. You don't have to take that on. That's the hardest part with these empaths that are changing the world is we feel that it is ours to hold. It isn't. So release that guilt, and give yourself grace, because you're human. And by being human and allowing the kids to see you as human, and allowing, them to see, this is a boundary I'm setting and here's why, and I give you permission to also set your own boundaries within the classroom, whether I agree with them or not, as long as they are appropriate, then that is exactly what they need to learn. That is being human. Give yourself grace so that they can also give themselves grace. Thank you so much for being a part of this, for listening. I hope that you gained some insights, some new information regarding setting healthy boundaries. If you have any feedback, I really, really, really would love to hear it, whether it is a gift for improvement or praise for encouragement, whatever it is. I encourage you to please follow the link and take this survey so that I can know how to continue to show up moving forward. So if you have any questions, feel free, I forgot to say this, but feel free to put them into the Q&A. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, and I am so grateful that you were here to spend this time with me. Thank you.